Thank you. I'll talk a little bit about myself in a second. How many of you were here last year? Oh, good. Because it was a great group last year, so I have a feeling it's going to be as great or even better this year. Let me start by just telling you how I got interested in working with leaders and CEOs. And my first job at 26 years old was to be director of a large university counseling center. And the counseling center had a staff of 42 psychologists and psychiatrists. And my first job was to be director of that organization. And so you can imagine what sort of introduction to leadership that is. It's like being thrown in a fiery steak or something, where everyone, the next youngest person was 42. Everyone's saying, what the hell's this kid doing here? And so you really have to deal with a lot of what all leaders have to deal with, which is resistance. But not only the resistance from the people that work for them, but their own resistance. Like I was really very frightened, and I tried to decide, well, I know what these people think of me. They think I shouldn't be here, and in some ways they were correct experience-wise. But we had a vice president that had decided that I should be there. And it wasn't an oh great phenomena for me, it was an oh shucks phenomena for me. So in that job, I eventually evolved to a position of associate vice president, which was a broader function. And I was so tied to the counseling center that when a new vice president that I chaired the search committee to hire asked me if I would like to function as an associate vice president for this division of 500 people, I said, well, I have to give up the counseling center. He said, absolutely. I said, I'm not interested. He said, okay, keep the counseling center. So I ended up doing both for my entire career. And I guess I didn't want to give up the richness of the organization that I was part of. But as part of being an associate vice president, we had a group that met once a week at lunchtime. And over 5 years, we probably read 150 books on leadership, organizations, organizational effectiveness, et cetera, which was quite a feat for me because I really never liked to read that much. So I had to kind of force myself to read, and I'm really happy now that they have audiobooks because I really like learning in that way more than I like reading. I don't know if it's because reading is such sort of a passive activity, but whatever the case. So we really learned a lot about what gets people motivated, what keeps leaders motivated, what kind of organizations bring the most out of people, and what is the real responsibility of a leader. But I was also a psychologist by training, so I wasn't only interested in how you shift people around in an organization, I was really also interested in the relationship between the internal frontier, the leader, and their effectiveness in being able to get people to align, to be energized, and to want to make their organization a success. And so fundamentally, leadership is the art of making a difference and of having the ability to achieve results through other people. Let's start off with the end in mind. There's a great book based on a series of studies with several of the top organizations in the country. It's called Return on Character. And the book was written by Fred Keel, who is a industrial psychologist and I believe also a clinical psychologist. And it's the first book that really demonstrated the relationship between the characteristics of the leader, which is all of you, and what the organization actually accomplishes. And what he did is he divided leaders in all of these organizations into two groups. The high character group, which he called the virtuosos, and then sort of like the average leader, the sort of boss type that kind of separates themselves from others and tells others what to do. And these were all big organizations, Fortune 500 companies, that type of organization. So he found that leaders that were what he called virtuosos or leaders of high character had 5 times the return on investment than the leaders that were in the other group. Now, so the question is, well, what is high character? What does good character mean? Well, he talked about 2 characteristics from the head and 2 from the heart. The 2 from the head were integrity and responsibility. You have to be viewed, and you have to be a person of high integrity, and you have to be a person that sees the responsibility for what's happening around you as your responsibility, not other people letting you down or other people not lining up. The 2 from the heart are really powerful, or as powerful as the 2 from the head. They are forgiveness and compassion. Now, one would say, well, why are those so important? And what is character? Well, character fundamentally is treating people who have no way of repaying you in a giving, loving, kind way. So you're really doing something in a very authentic way. Now, compassion and forgiveness isn't just for others, it also is for yourself. And if it doesn't apply to yourself, you're never going to be able to give it to others. One of my favorite quotes is from a 15-year-old saint called Saint Teresa of Lisieux. And when Saint Teresa was 15 years old, she wrote a letter to her sister who was in Paris. And in the letter, and she said this in a religious context, but you can just also interpret it in a secular context. She said, to be able to serenely bear the pain of being displeasing to yourself is to be for Jesus a pleasant place of shelter. Now you could easily say, if in a secular context, that to be able to serenely bear the pain of being displeasing to yourself is to be mentally healthy, is to be adaptable, is to be effective. So now we know a little bit about what good organizations look like and how important character is, but what does the world of work actually look like? And here are a few disturbing findings. 93% of people at work feel that they have never even once been acknowledged or recognized by a manager or a supervisor. And only 20% of workers feel empowered to act resourcefully or act creatively. That is, the employees have the same access to their own internal power, I believe, as their leader or manager has to theirs. 70% of workers, and this is from a Canadian study, would be willing to take a 10% reduction in pay if they could get their boss fired. Now imagine how much they're giving. Imagine how much they're giving you and your company, and imagine how they're responding to your customers. So, and then the big classic study, which I also talked about last year, but it's such an amazing study. 100 million people in companies all across the US, they studied, and they found that only 30% of them were fully engaged. And that 30% accounted for an increase of 240% in productivity. 70% were disengaged. And here's the killer. 20% of that 70% were actively disengaged, which means not only were they not doing their job, not only was their energy somewhere else, but they would actually sabotage the company if they could. Very sad. That's a large percentage of people, and that's a huge sample. And that's what all of us here are dealing with. And what's important here today is to apply these lessons to yourself, because you are the power in your organization, and how you relate to yourself and how much access you have to your own power, no matter how scary it might seem, is going to be the upper limit on what you're going to be able to get from others. So here's one of my favorite photographs. What do you see in this photograph that strikes you? Anybody? There are no wrong answers. Okay, he's tethered. What else? I'm sorry? Okay, it's dreary, right. Yeah, to be tethered is dreary. Maybe one more thought? Say it louder, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, exactly, yeah. So this is a picture of all of us. And what's striking about this picture, it's really a metaphor for every one of you and me. So we have all this power, we have this enormous potential that's unrealized, and yet we're tethered by this little thin rope, and we don't move. Now, why does an elephant who could just lift their foot, lift the stake out of the ground, stay tethered? The reason is because they were tethered as a young elephant. And they believe that they can't really do that because of early learning. And we believe that we can't do a lot of things that we could not only do, but we could do exponentially well because of early learning. And so we're tethered just like that elephant. And one of the things I want to follow through with this metaphor today, but what I really want to do and what I really want to achieve in my part of the presentation is to make you curious about yourself in ways that you haven't been curious up to now. So I see basically every one of us here has two choices in life. We can either extend the current version of our life or of ourselves, just like we saw. Like that elephant can do certain things while tethered. They can eat, they can drink, but they can't do anything in comparison to what they could do if they were untethered. Or the next choice we have is we can upgrade the current version of ourselves. We can take the early software and not let it limit us. Most people, unfortunately, as we saw in the studies that I just showed, spend their lives pursuing the first path. Let me just perfect my skills here. Let me drive myself a little bit harder. But we're still driving, to use a metaphor that reminds me of Reto, we're a 12-cylinder Ferrari that's in bad need of a tune-up, and we're operating on 8 cylinders. So we might as well not be a Ferrari. And so then the way that we cope, the first option is to keep it tuned up, to drive on flat surfaces so you really don't put the vehicle to a real test. And that's what we do to our lives. Now there's several ways to get out of this, and how we get out of this depends on what we're ready for. Some of us are ready for baby steps. Some of us are ready to really challenge ourselves in serious ways. And some of us are ready for the plunge, as Michelle would say. So here are some common ways that people deal with unraveling the ways in which we're tethered as a result of our early experience. The first is to move from unaware to self-aware. Now, the way I see that is the unaware person, all of us know people like that. They're totally oblivious to the impact that they have on us or others, yet they have tremendously powerful opinions, and they know best what's best for others, and so this is the unaware person. The self-aware person is a little bit better than that. That's the person that says, I know I'm a procrastinator, or I know I have a bad temper, or I know I'm impatient, but does absolutely nothing about it. That's self-awareness. A lot of people say we're going to try to increase your self-awareness, and I think that's better than unawareness. But in terms of your behavior, in terms of your impact on others, it's not all that much better. And then the next step is emotional intelligence, which are a series of learnable skills, and you have a handout that really describes some of them. And Dr. Smith is going to probably talk a little bit in more depth about this, but this is taking your self-knowledge and helping you gain insight into the impact that your behavior has on others. For example, if you know you have a bad temper, before you belt somebody, you might count to 10. Or you might do something intentionally, understanding that what you're aware of in yourself is a limitation, and you don't want that limitation interfering with business or happiness or other things. So in some ways, emotional intelligence is like a prosthesis or something that's learnable that helps us use our our self-awareness more effectively. But the real change in life that's worth pursuing is self-knowledge. St. Augustine once said, to know yourself is to know God. And in many ways, self-knowledge is not unlike the ends of spirituality. The problem is that in many ways, organized religion hasn't been the best vehicle for doing that, because it's sort of told you what you should be and added to the shame of your early life, when in fact, what you need to do is to go and discover your real self, discover the pure part of you, the powerful part of you. And so I like to say that psychology is in some ways the technology for achieving spiritual ends. So let's say, here's some things, some ways that you can gain self-awareness to the extent to which you don't have it. And at CEO Effectiveness, one of the things we have is we have a whole continuum of services. So the person that can just stand a little light, we can at least enlighten them up to that point and hopefully encourage them to take the next step. And so one of the things that we offer to increase your self-awareness are some reading materials. And Michelle alluded to some of the books that we've published to do exactly that. The first is called Business Success Through Self-Knowledge. It's a little technical, but I made it intentionally short because, number one, because I don't like to read long books, and I figured most people don't. But it also is an audio form as well as written form. The second one is much more interesting, and it's in audio or written form. But I think that the second one takes the principles of the first one and creates an allegory where people live on this mountain, and as they ascend the mountain, they increase in self-knowledge. And everyone has a sort of like a tattoo on their back, and so they can't really see themselves as they truly are, but other people can see the tattoo. And as they ascend the mountain of self-knowledge, it shows how their life changes, their relationships change, their effectiveness change. And each chapter is on one of the things that I have felt most people, all of us, need the most direction on, need to learn how to do this. So at the end of every chapter are some steps that you can take if you find yourself depicted in that chapter. Again, the chapters are short. It's a different sort of book, but I think you could get something out of it. And the last book there wasn't written by me, it was written by Navy SEAL Commander Peter Berardi. And it's a workbook that he uses in training special forces based on my book, Ascend. So people in special forces around the country are actually using Peter's workbook, The Path, to actually gain some of the things that we're talking about. So let's go back to our old selves, our unaware selves, which I think at this point, people in this room, I can just tell by looking at your faces and by seeing the amount of attention and your reactions that you're definitely not in the unaware group of people. And so there's at least levels of self-awareness and possibly quite a bit of emotional intelligence in this group. And I find that very pleasing as I look at your eyes and interact with you. But what would a leader that is unaware look like? Well, a leader that's unaware would see themselves in an elevated position. They would separate themselves from others. You could see they would be tethered, and all of their workers would be tethered. And they would try to squeeze as much work or sometimes time or however they frame it out of this tethered workforce headed by this tethered leader. Now, just adding self-awareness, which is like the first major step out of unawareness, this leader, you see, is closer to the ground. There's more light around for everyone, and at least some portion of their workers are doing different things. They're not all facing away. They're not actively resisting. They're not being willing to take a 10% reduction in pay if they could get us fired, okay? So the next step, and I'm going to touch briefly, as I did on self-awareness and emotional intelligence, because there are other people that are much more skilled and knowledgeable in that area. But these are the areas that you need to master, the broad areas, and you can see there's a lot more detail in your handouts. But these are the broad areas that you need to master to increase your emotional intelligence. And they're all learnable skills, and they're all helpful. And they can take you beyond self-awareness, but they can't take you all the way home. And this is what a leader who's emotionally intelligent looks like. You see, everyone is still tethered, but they're oriented towards each other. They're engaged. They're aware of the leader. The leader is closer to them. The leader is almost on the same ground. Now, the next step is self-knowledge. And this is the part that I believe combines my experience as a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst, my experience as a leader, my experience as a business person, into a package that helps transform the leader into the kind of person that can have the A team working for them, that can have people engaged, active, alive, creative, and motivated. So we have to start to understand ourselves by understanding this beautiful depiction of ourselves, which I stole actually from Michelle last year. It's a beautiful depiction of ourselves. And you can see this is an iceberg. And most of what we deal with in life is the area of the iceberg above the waterline. We see behavior, we get annoyed by others' behavior, others get annoyed by our behavior. This is like 100% conscious, and many people live exclusively at this level. Even when we go to school, one of the things I used to really be annoyed with at the university is that the people that were teaching the courses were experts in the content, like they knew geology or they knew business or they knew math, but they didn't know anything about how people learn. And the people that were experts in learning, which were the psychologists, they understood learning, motivation, they had nothing to do with teaching the courses. So that's why most academic courses are boring, because they don't really transform us. They just deal at the level of behavior. They give us content. We memorize or master the content. We take a test, we spit it back, we get a grade, and we've really learned nothing about ourselves. And the sad thing is that content in a university or in any kind of education in our contemporary knowledge-based society is outdated in 8 months or at maximum 18 months after we get out of college. And so all this content that we learned doesn't really do anything for us because we haven't changed ourselves. And the same thing applies to a leader. Now, I told you I've done some work with Special Forces, working with Navy SEALs. Two of the people on the CEO effectiveness team are Navy SEAL types. One is Navy SEAL Commander Peter Berardi, and the other is Gino Calora, who was really a Secret Service type of person. And both of them have PhDs in leadership and effectiveness. So these are tough guys that have really taken on the responsibility of gaining great knowledge about how people learn and how people lead. So this is a book that I really like a lot. It's written by Stanley McChrystal, who was a Navy SEAL general, and Chris Fussell, who was also a Navy SEAL commander. And if you look at the bottom part of it, it talks about leadership in the 21st century places self-knowledge at the center. And they didn't choose the word self-knowledge by accident. They've really arrived at an understanding. And the military, there aren't a lot of rooms for mistakes. And so they realize that what they need is adaptability, because when you're in a battlefield or when you're in a military situation, you don't have any idea whatsoever what you're going to be facing. And so you can't rehearse things, you've got to be able to be adaptable. What makes you unadaptable is all the luggage that we carry, all of the ways that we drag our past into our present, and we get weighed down by it. Again, this will make sense to you at this point and hopefully increase your curiosity. The most effective leaders pay attention to events, patterns of behavior, systematic structures, but focus most predominantly on purpose and systemic structure. What that means is, if you remember the iceberg, that the most effective leaders go into the water. They think about the habits that people continue to display over and over, and their influence on the habits of those people and their productivity. And they even wonder about what is driving this person. If you went to a physician with a fever, they wouldn't say, well, stay in a cold room till the fever goes away, which they would say, let's find out what's causing it, what's happening at the systemic level. Now, again, these are just some ideas for gaining self-knowledge. And one of the things that I think is important as a leader, and we're going to talk just a brief bit about this, is what part of your brain you're using when you're interacting with yourself and you're interacting with others. When the broader you're thinking, for example, some of the vision plans for Japanese companies are 400 years. So they're actually looking 400 years ahead in what they're doing today. And that's something that is very hard for us to understand in this country. But what that does is that engages your frontal lobes. Just like spiritual thoughts engage your frontal lobes, or big audacious goals, as Michelle said, engage your frontal lobes. And so a leader that operates at the strategic level, we all have to deal with the workplace, we all have to deal with the contributions we make, but if you look at the organization, the more you stay at the strategic level, the more you stay 500 feet above the ground, even in your task of installing this or dealing with clients or even dealing with suppliers, the more effective you're going to be. The leadership question that all of us should ask ourselves, and this might be worth writing down or keeping in your mind, which of your dreams are so big that only your heart and not your head can hold them? Because when you're dreaming at that level, your frontal lobes are fully engaged. You're bypassing, at least for the moment, a lot of the stuff that holds you back, that keeps you from being aware and adaptable in the moment with other people. Now, how do you know if your frontal lobes are engaged subjectively? Well, if you were to take a heroin addict and give them heroin, and then look at their frontal lobes would be completely lit up. Your frontal lobes contain the highest concentration of endorphin receptors of any part of the body. But you don't need to take heroin to get those frontal lobes stimulated. All you need to do is to think big thoughts, think strategically, live in a longer time horizon, do the harder thing, meditate. All of those things stimulate your frontal lobes. If you're operating with a stimulated frontal lobe, particularly the prefrontal lobes, you're going to be feeling great. You're going to be doing your best thinking, and you're going to have the most impact interpersonally, and you're going to be using your awareness, integrating both social, intellectual, and emotional parts of your brain in the most effective way that your brain was designed. So what does the self-knowledgeable leader look like? They're untethered. They're not afraid of taking risk. They're willing to bring the whole team up with them. The leader is going to bring the whole team up with them. So now what I want to do is I want to take just a little diversion, and let me see where we are on time. I think we're okay. I want to just divert just a little bit because I want to tell you why it's so hard to change and why you could, for example, go to a talk or listen to somebody that's a motivational speaker, get excited, and then in 2 or 3 days, you're like right back exactly where you were. Well, why is that? What is that gravity that drags us back? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but in order to do that, we have to go back to the beginning. And one of the reasons that we're so influenced by our early experiences is that we're wired biologically and neurologically for that purpose. So all of us have mirror neurons in our brain. Now, what do mirror neurons do? If I'm sitting in front of you and I'm trying to BS you in some kind of way, you might not be consciously aware that I'm doing that at the time, but your mirror neurons are lit up. The same mirror neurons that I have lit up in my brain are being lit up in your brain. And you have a gut level feeling that something feels unstable about this interaction. And the decision to buy or not to buy, to enter in an agreement is complicated by that disruption. And we're hardwired for that. And I'm going to show you something now that those of you who weren't here last year are going to be amazed by. But this is a picture of a human brain, of the interaction between brain cells. For a newborn, you can see over here on the, let's see if I can do this. Over here, you can see there's almost no connections. As soon as you're born, this is where you are. And this is where you are at 2 years. Now remember, most development, a kid until they're 7 or 8 years old is in beta. That means that they don't think critically. They're just, whatever the parents are doing is getting absorbed literally. So you say, well, when does this start? Like when do the mirror neurons kick in? Well, here's a picture of a 41-minute-old infant. You can see a 41-minute-year-old infant can mimic 3 expressions in an adult. This is with you saw what was happening in the brain, nothing. So this is what you call hard wiring. You don't have to be taught to do this. All right, then we take this infant and we put them in a family, and then we have 2 other hardwired tendencies other than mirror neurons. The brain has a hardwired tendency to interpret ambiguity as danger. So that's why when all of us are in situations that are new, particularly if it stretches us beyond our comfort zone, we experience anxiety. Some of us, if we're too afraid to experience anxiety, we might experience anger and just get teed off at a customer, at a supplier, at an employee, at a spouse. I mean, all of this happens. All of this is a consequence of lack of self-knowledge. The other hardwired tendency is when we're in a stressful situation, we regress down to our lowest common denominator. And so you might not have thrown a glass out of the window for 20 years, but you got so annoyed today that it went out the window and you had to get the window replaced or whatever. I'm just using that as an exaggerated example, but I'm sure some of you have done that at some time in your life, and that would be perfectly reasonable to have done. So we have these 3 hardwired tendencies. We have mirror neurons that force us to model with our earliest caretakers. And remember, these things are stimulated in relation to your employees as well, and in relation to your customers as well. And it also, these things really had survival value. Why does our brain interpret ambiguity as danger? Why do we double down on things that have worked in the past? And the reason is because the major function of the brain is to keep us alive physically. And we are everyone in this room, we are the descendants of people that saw a stick and thought it was a snake, rather than a snake and thought it was a stick, because those people aren't here. And so we have some brains that are pretty amazing, because the brains that are in this room are those that survived all of these opportunities to be killed, to be devastated, to be eaten alive. So our brains are well practiced at the things that now hold us back. And so we don't worry about tigers and being devoured by poisonous snakes anymore. We've translated all that learning. Our brain has shifted that to the fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, and the fear of humiliation. Now, none of those things are going to interfere with your survival. But yet those things hold us back artificially, because we don't know ourselves as we truly are. Now I'm going to tell you a story about, there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. How many people have heard of the amygdala? Okay, the amygdala is like a little teeny part of our brain. It's kind of where this little ray of sunshine is in our brain. And the amygdala has the ability to capture our brain. How many people have had the experience of, like, you're driving somewhere and you get there and you have no memory of how you got there? Okay, some part of your brain took over and got you somewhere without your conscious awareness. Well, I'm going to tell you a little story about myself, and it's very brief, but this is a story of when I was 16 years old. My dad bought me a brand new car. And he drove an old car, so I felt pretty guilty about having the new car. But we were driving from Miami to Tampa, and it was a Grand Prix, so I was driving like 90 miles an hour because you didn't feel the speed. And before I knew it, there was a car behind me facing in the other direction that I had just missed a head-on collision with, and it was a 2-lane road with a median in the middle. But somehow my amygdala captured my brain, led me to drive on the median to miss this car, no awareness consciously whatsoever. Go back, and missed all the things that were on the median, go back on the lane and saw this car facing behind me. That's how powerful the amygdala is. And everyone has the ability, under certain circumstances, for the amygdala to capture your brain. Now, one of the disadvantages I'll talk about in a second, this is a picture of the amygdala. And the reason I'm showing the longhorned sheep is there are 2 sides to your brain, the right and the left hemisphere. The picture you're seeing is if you, it's called the sagittal view of the brain. It's as if you had a buzz saw and just cut your brain right this way. You're looking on the inside of the right half. Well, that little thing there captures the right hemisphere from birth. So all of your learning is fear-based. You've got, everything your parents tell you is deadly serious. You're like vigilant, aware of everything. And as you're going through these experiences, your brain is building circuits. But those circuits aren't permanent, we just think they are. And we behave as if they are. So let me jump over here. I want to show you an example of the influence of mental models. Now, remember we said that mental models are at the deepest part of our consciousness. One of the greatest books ever written in organization is The Fifth Discipline by Peter Sinjay. Remember we talked about learning being changing your behavior in college? Learning, according to Sinjay, is changing your mental models. That's the kind of learning that occurs in psychotherapy. Now, how powerful are mental models and how powerful are the variables that we've been talking about? Here's a picture of 3 apex predators that would absolutely fight to the death in any other situation except they were raised together. They were raised together at a very early age. And when they're separated, all right, so you could see, again, I'm winding up now, you can see that the important thing is learning is defined not as changing your behavior, not as changing your habits, which is more in the emotional intelligence, self-awareness area, but as changing your mental models. Now I want to show you one more slide, and then, well, 2 more slides. But this is a slide, it's called the Yerkes-Dodson Law in Psychology. It's the most important law in all of psychology. Now, what do you see when you see this slide? You see performance on one axis and drive, or I call it arousal because it makes it more interesting, but it's high drive, low drive. So what do you see here? At levels of low arousal or low drive, performance is very low. But where else is it also very low? At levels of high drive. Now, so exaggerated high drive and low drive are both ways of not knowing ourselves. Self-knowledge is at the top. Okay, the optimal performance is achieved at intermediate levels of drive. Well, why is that? Because when you go in either direction, you're talking about defenses. Defenses that keep us from knowing ourselves as we truly are and having really access to ourselves as we truly are. So the right and the left side of the curve are more similar than the center. And here's just here's 4 statements I want you to take away with you. At least in terms of getting your curiosity up. And then I will be honored to turn the stage over to Dr. Smith, who really has the knowledge of how to do things, how to achieve results through groups. And she's going to give you a lot more practical stuff. I've just been kind of like foreplay. So, all right, the quality of your relationship with yourself is the upper limit on the quality of the relationship you can have with anyone else. You can take that to the bank. If you're having trouble with somebody, start by looking at yourself. The things we are aware of in ourselves are less influential than the things we don't know about ourselves. You can take that to the bank. What we don't know about ourselves glints and winks at us. What that means throughout our lives, that you always have this sense that you have more to offer than you're able to access. That something, like there might be a few moments here or there in your life when you're operating on all 12 cylinders, and you say, why can't I do that all the time? Well, that's life's way of giving you a little glimpse of what you're capable of and of reminding you that you have work to do. But it's different than the kind of work you do to achieve self-awareness and emotional intelligence. It's more profound work. And then lastly, there's a direct relationship between your level of self-knowledge, your impact on others, and how comfortable others feel in your presence. And you can see from the sheet that we handed out, the implications of not knowing yourself on all different kinds of facets of your life. And now I'm really honored to turn you over to a top executive from Publix, 173,000 employees, a Fortune 50 company. I'm honored to introduce you to Dr. Alison Smith.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today. Bill did a great job, and I saw so many of you taking notes and so many of you taking pictures, and that just shows me, he mentioned it, about the level of engagement you have, and it just reinforces that to me as well. And he did a great job of setting a foundation for making the connection between self-knowledge and the ability to access one's potential. And so that's one of the things that I'm really excited about today is I'm going to be talking about and sharing with you some practical ideas about what you can do once you implement these to actually show some results. And so one of the things that I was really excited about is I had the opportunity to talk to a few of you right before we came in here today. And the question I was really interested in was, how does it feel? How does it feel when you've done a great job and your customer sits back, flips on the light? How does that feel? How do they feel? And the answer I got, I felt it from you when you told me. I heard peace. I heard satisfaction. And I heard an oasis where they can relax. And I saw the passion that you all had for that, and what I thought was really interesting to me was those feelings that you all described that you want your customer to experience, that's actually the same types of feelings that Bill and I want for our customers, for the people that we work with. We want people to have that sense of peace, to have that sense of satisfaction, and to have an oasis of strength to realize their potential. And so I was really appreciative to learn that from you, and I really, really felt that passion from you. And I had the opportunity to meet Michelle about 6 months ago. And that passion that you all are exhibiting, boy, I sure got that from her. Not just the passion for the business itself, but what I really felt from Michelle was the passion for developing the team. The passion, you see that, you hear it, you say, yeah, right? So you know that, you feel that. And that really came across very strongly to me. And so that's one of the reasons I'm really excited to be here. You know, they say Dr. Smith, I go by Alison, so I'm Alison. And what makes me passionate is helping companies and helping people identify what their vision is of what they want to achieve and helping them get there. And, you know, we talk about the word leadership a lot today. And sometimes we think about, okay, a leader, gosh, I have to have a lot of people that work for me to be a leader. But that's not true. You are a leader in what you do, regardless of whether you actually have people on your team. You're a leader building your brand. And so all of these concepts that we're talking about today really apply to everybody. And what I really believe in is that they don't really just apply in the business world, and Bill alluded to that. They really apply across all aspects of our lives, because what you find is that we're not compartmentalized. We don't go to work one way and then necessarily go home and become a different person. We're the same throughout those. Sometimes we're a little bit different in the behaviors, hopefully, that we engage in, but we are the same person across all the elements of our life. And so these tips and these resources and tools that I'm going to share with you are things that can really apply across all the areas. And so I hope that you find at least one nugget of a takeaway, as Mary mentioned, at least one nugget of a takeaway that you can bring back and apply somewhere in your life. That's me. The picture's probably a little bit better than this. That's okay. So, when we talk about this, I really liked this slide. And it's something that Bill talked a lot about. It's potential, possibility, truth, living life. And one of the things that I think we all can feel if we look at ourselves is there more that we want to give? Is there more that we want to give in our professional life? Is there more that we want to give in areas of our personal life? Have we reached our full potential? Maybe there's moments where we're like, yes, we sure did. But there's lots of moments where we know there is more. And this really matters to me because I really believe that you have to own the potential that you have to make changes, and I really believe that it makes a difference not just for yourself, but for everybody that you touch. It's the ripple effect that I have seen so many times that ends up creating positivity in the world around you or not. Because we've all had that experience where somebody has interacted with us, and after that experience, does it end? It doesn't. It stays with you. It stays with you. If it's a positive experience, it could make your day. And if it's a negative experience, you might be up all night worrying about it. And it's the same thing with you, especially as leaders, especially as brand owners. The influence that you have on the people around you, it's a ripple effect. It makes a difference when they go home at night. Makes a difference potentially with how they interact with their spouse or how they interact with their children or what they take to their next level of interaction. And so I'm a really big believer in owning the potential. And there's really 4 actions that I'm going to speak to that address this concept. And the first, which is already up there, which is great, is the concept of knowing your end game. Knowing your end game. You can't get somewhere if you don't know where you're going, right? We're all sitting here today because when you got up this morning, you knew where you were going to be. So we're all here. If you woke up and you didn't know where you were going to be, we wouldn't be here together. And that may seem like a really simple example, but that illustration works no matter what you're doing. You've got to know what your end game is in order to get there. And so when you think of your end game, I think what becomes important to understand is that ownership concept. Own your influence, own your leadership. So I want you to think about a couple of characteristics, a couple of leadership characteristics. Just think about it in your mind real quick. What comes to mind for you when you think about the type of leader that inspires others or the type of leader that you want to be? Just think about that in your mind. It could be so many different things, right? It could be that somebody thinks establishing trust is really important. It could be communicating really well. It could be making sure that your integrity is flawless as you deal with other people. It could be being positive with others. There's a lot of different things that may come to your mind. We're all very different. But to me, what's important is you think about this is on the right side of the slide. It's your leadership vision. It's what you want your vision to be. That's what has to be front and center. That's what has to be conscious for you to get where you want to go. You know, Bill mentioned the story about the car. He talked about his first car. And I didn't have the same experience with my first car, but I know a lot of people have a very fond memory about their first car. Very fond memory about their first car. And if you think about your first car, and you may have worked for your first car, you may have taken really good care of your first car, polished the car. You're nodding your head, aren't you? You're nodding your head. You feel that first car, don't you? And you took great care of it. You took great care of it. And you spent a lot of time thinking about it, cultivating it, making it shine. Well, guess what? Leadership is like your first car. It requires effort. For some people, yeah, maybe they're just born to be great leaders. Maybe they're just born to positively influence others. But for the majority of people, it requires effort and planning and care and polishing. And so that's a takeaway that I think is a very important aspect of self-awareness. It requires effort and thought to get to the place where your leadership vision is realized and can be established. So I want to share with you 3 questions, and I'm going to give you a minute to think about this, and I would love to be able to debrief this in our room, but we're not going to do that today. These are going to be personal questions for yourself that I just want you to take a minute and reflect on. The first, what is the leadership vision you have for yourself? What are the biggest areas where you need to focus to achieve that vision? And lastly, what is the outcome you can expect if you're able to diminish the gap? The gap between where you are and where you want to go. If you spend some time self-reflecting and giving some thought to these questions, it will help you move in the direction that you want to go. And I see lots of people writing, and I think the other piece for me that's important to communicate is, for some people, you might read these, and you might say, oh, I already know the answers to this. I didn't even need the 30 seconds that we pause. And some of you may say, gosh, I don't know. I never really thought about that. Why does it even matter? Why does it matter? And there's no right or wrong. All of that is really just information for you to think about as you think about the journey that you're taking. The journey that you're taking to build the vision that you have for yourself and for your team. Know your end game. Action 1. The second concept that I wanted to discuss was the concept of trigger points. And that first segment, those first two words are really important. Mood matters. Mood matters. Have you ever been at a family reunion, talking with your family, and all of a sudden, somebody walks up, and that mood changes? It does, right? Have you ever been at a social function, and you're having a great time, everything is going great, you're talking with your friends, and that one person walks up, and that mood changes? Have you ever been the one that walks over to a group and the mood changes? And if you're saying no, then you just don't realize it, because that happens to all of us, no matter what our intention is. And mood matters. The mood that you set as a leader, it matters. It drives the culture of what you stand for. It drives the culture of your team, it drives the culture of your business, and it drives your results. Because as you influence others, if they're unsure and they don't know what to expect from you because it's unpredictable, or they're worried that they're going to hear a sarcastic comment, or they don't know if something that they do is going to make you angry and you're going to raise your voice. In that uncertainty, achieving business results becomes way more difficult. Because people who feel secure and safe and valued are much more likely to engage in the behaviors that make them and you successful. They're more likely to be on time. They're more likely to hear a customer complaint and take that seriously and own it and share it, because they're in a culture where they feel valued and trusted. And the scary part is that sometimes we may always try our best, but we're not perfect. Now, I don't know you all personally. I wish I did. And you don't know me personally, and I wish you did. But what I do know is that nobody in this room is perfect. We make mistakes. And so knowing, though, and owning that, and trying to understand, how do I make sure that my mood doesn't negatively impact my team, that matters. And the ways to do that are simple. I say simple, but it's hard to put in practice. It causes reflection. Number one, observe the buildup. Observe the buildup. There's going to be things that happen that tend to put you in that mood. There's going to be people that you say, every time I deal with that person, I lose my temper, I lose my patience, they drive me crazy. That's a buildup, right? That's a buildup. And there's going to be that. We're not saying that there's never going to be that. We know that's going to happen. But the way you can control the culture is to better reflect and understand that about yourself, so you can anticipate that. Because if you can anticipate, here comes John, I always have a negative interaction with John. What am I going to do about it? Is that interaction going to be negative again today? Well, yeah, not if you don't stop and think about it. Notice the patterns. Recognize those patterns. And we're talking about this in a little bit of a negative tone, and I felt like it was important because one of the biggest derailers is when people are sarcastic and angry and they swear. Those are the negative things that happen that as a leader, you don't get a lot of forgiveness on. You can have a bad day every once in a while, but you can't have bad days often. You can't have bad days often. That's not going to work. You're not going to get the outcome. And I see some of y'all nodding. I know. I've been with leaders that do that, right? And so this can also be positive, though, too. Because you've been in situations where somebody's experienced something very positive, and what caused that person to feel great? Did you recognize them? Did you ask them how their weekend was? Did you ask them about what was going on in their family? Those things matter. Those things give you the outcome of helping somebody feel secured and cared for and confident and create a trusting environment. So this can be positive too, not just negative. The concept is there's a cause and effect here that with proper reflection can get you to a different result. So action 2, evaluate the trigger points, and mood matters. The third action I want to talk about is leveraging mindfulness. Bill gave us a lot of information about how the brain can be changed. And mindfulness is a way to literally change the brain. And why do we want to change our brain? I have a lot of good reasons for that, I know. But one of the things that we want to be aware of is our stressors, is our critical points that cause us to engage in behaviors that we don't want to engage in. And being able to be mindful allows you to have more self-regulation on your mood and on your behaviors. And mindfulness, when people say, well, what is mindfulness? I think about it as a meditation. And I don't know if you all have read anything about mindfulness or meditation. And if you haven't, I highly encourage you to do so. But the power of this is that with just some dedicated effort to meditating and being mindful, you can change your brain. So you can start with 5 minutes a day. For 2 weeks, you will see positive change. If you do this for 6 weeks, your brain will be changing even more. So I recommend 5 minutes a day for 6 weeks is what I recommend. But even if you just stick to 5 minutes for 2 weeks, it's better than nothing. And what you'll see is that your brain will change in ways that allows you to do more self-regulation of mood. It brings calmness. This is something that should not even be optional, in my opinion, for executives. And I think Michelle, we were talking about this earlier, and so I'm very excited. She's actually going to have us go through a short mindfulness exercise.
Hi, and welcome to the Headspace Mindful Technology exercise. So with so much technology around us, it's really easy to forget that ultimately we get to define the relationship we have with our technology. For most of us, we've developed some quite bad habits, and one of those habits is to react to every single little thing, every sound, every vibration that comes from our phone or our computer. So this exercise is about learning how to be more responsive, a little less reactive. So we're going to use an exercise called noting, where it allows you to see when the mind is sort of darting off, and rather than simply following it, going with it, we take a moment to realize, oh yeah, actually there's a choice in this moment. We can either let it go or we can choose to engage with it. And by practicing this on a regular basis, it'll help you to have a slightly better, healthier relationship with the technology around you. So just take a moment to get comfortable. Make sure you're not going to be disturbed. And just begin with one big deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. As you breathe out, if you haven't done already, you can just gently close the eyes. And just feeling that contact, being reassured by the weight of the body pressing down. Feeling the feet on the floor and the hands and the arms on the legs. Just taking a moment to notice how you feel. Enjoying that feeling of being free from any technology around you. And as you Sit there just starting to notice the movement of the breath in the body. Just that gentle rising, falling sensation. You don't have to breathe in any special way, just following the natural rhythm of the breath. And just staying with that. Every now and again a thought will arise. The moment you realize that the mind's wandering off with that thought, simply pausing. In your mind, just silently noting it as, oh yeah, it's thinking. Letting it go and coming back to the breath again. So just staying with the breath and just practicing this idea of acknowledging something, but not necessarily engaging with it. Just letting it go and coming back to whatever you're doing in that moment. Right now, the breath. Not only the breath, just starting to become more aware of the body. Once again, that feeling of contact. The body pressing down, the feet on the floor, the hands, the arms, on the legs. And then when you're ready, in your own time, just gently opening the eyes again.
So I hope you got a benefit out of that. That's a great example of how quickly just paying attention to the moment and some deep reflection and exercises can change your mood really quickly. The other piece I wanted to talk about as it relates to mindfulness has to do with thinking and being reflective in your interactions, before, during, and after your interactions. And so we talked about sometimes we're going to be in difficult circumstances. We're going to be facing meetings that really matter to us. We're going to be facing a difficult customer, a difficult person, a difficult spouse. And so one of the ways that you can leverage the best outcome of these situations is before the interaction, giving some thought to what you want to bring to that interaction and what you want that interaction to be like. It's about that conscious thought. Just taking a moment, I did this over here myself. I thought to myself, I'm about to stand up and talk to everybody. What is it that I want to bring to you all to make a difference, to hopefully make a difference? I spent some time thinking about that. And we have that all throughout the day. It can be a big moment, it can be a small moment. But for those critical things that matter, practicing that mindfulness before can make a difference. And I've also been in situations where I'm in the middle of a situation and it's during the interaction that I need to take a pause. And you may find that too. If something isn't going well, if an interaction is not going the way that you envisioned it, there is nothing wrong with taking a small pause in yourself right then and there and recognizing this is not going the way that I thought. How do I change that? Because if you just keep going without consciousness, you're not going to get a different outcome. But if you stop and you reflect and you think about it, now at least you have a chance. And one of the most important things that I do, I think it's the most important, is after the interaction. Because I've been in situations, I'm sure you are too, where I didn't perform my best. Wasn't the best self that I could be. And at the end of the day, I think about my day. I think about what went really well. What am I really happy with? And what are those parts of my day that didn't go the way I wanted them to? And what was my role in that? Did I not prepare enough? Did I not give enough time? Was I too anxious? Was I defensive? Was I competitive? What was going on? Was I thinking about myself too much? Was I not recognizing the mood of others? What was I doing that next time I could do different? That's the kind of self-reflection that allows you to make changes. It's that awareness, it's that recognition, that leadership. It's like our car, it's a conscious process. So action 3, leverage mindfulness. This is our last one. The fourth action I want to leave you with is the concept of giving and seeking genuine feedback. And the word that was most important to me in thinking about this concept is the word genuine. Because if you're seeking feedback and you're saying to somebody, hey, I want to know what I can do better, and they think, no, you don't. You just want me to tell you what you want to hear. That's not genuine. You're not going to get genuine feedback if that authenticity isn't there. If somebody really thinks they're just doing lip service, they don't really want to hear it, you're not going to get it. And what happens when you don't get it? What happens? This is the biggest mistake I see of leaders. They don't have feedback. I have seen so many leaders who've gotten to a certain point and everybody around them sees what's wrong, right? But they don't, because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to recognize it. They don't want to face it, and they get derailed. They've got potential, they have intellectual potential, but they don't have all the potential that they need to do more, to go further. They get derailed because they're unwilling to hear and understand what everybody else already knows. People know us. They see you. They know your faults. Bill can tell you my faults if you asked him. I hope we don't. He can tell you. He knows them. We don't have to hide them, right? But the only way to get to a different place is to be willing and to understand and to seek that feedback in a genuine way. And the most important thing about that is the vulnerability and trust. And vulnerability and trust is the foundation for everything. If you don't have trust, if you don't trust somebody, they're not going to give you your business. They're not going to give you everything they have. They don't trust you. You've got to have that foundation of trust. And one way of doing this is by giving and receiving genuine feedback from others. It establishes trust. It helps you understand those parts of yourself that other people know that you need to work on. Because we're all on a journey. We're not perfect. Nobody is. We're all on a journey. And we all have to help each other get to a better place to influence others more positively, because everything we do has that ripple effect. So I want to end with this quote. It's not what you look at that matters. It's what you see. It's not what you look at that matters. It's what you see. It's what you allow yourself to see. It's what you put yourself in the position to see. It's what you give to others to tell them, I want to see so I can change if I need to. If I need to. So we talked about 4 different actions. We talked about knowing your end game. We talked about knowing your trigger points. We talked about mood mattering. We talked about mindfulness. And we talked about giving and seeking feedback. 4 things. I hope that with our time here today, there will be at least a nugget that you'll be able to take back with you, whether it's in your professional life or your personal life. Thank you for your time.